Hi everyone, welcome back to another update video. This time we'll be doing an update for all of September and a little bit of October. Apologize for sending this video out a little bit later than normal. This month I took a couple of days off at the beginning of October. My wife and I actually went over to California. We did some touring in Paso Robles, or Robles, I guess is the correct way of pronouncing it maybe. Anyway, it's a good wine region, so we spent some time there, and then we made our way up to Sonoma and Napa area. Spent some time there as well. I had some fantastic wines, great time relaxing and whatnot. So back to the real world here. And also, I wanted to provide not only an update, obviously for September, but to go through October as well. And because of the delay, I'm actually going to probably delay my next video in November, probably a little bit closer to Thanksgiving time, and then we'll do another one before the end of the year. But this has been another very busy, very exciting couple of weeks here at Juniper Mist. We've had some phenomenal new feature releases, all of which obviously are available on our website. If you go to the Manage dashboard and show all of our feature releases there by clicking on the question mark on the top right-hand side of the screen, you would have the option to see all of our different feature releases, all done here in the product update page. So feel free to take a look at all the details. I'm going to highlight some of the higher level, more specific, which I think are more generally available or generally applicable features that I think the customers will find the most use out of. So I have a little cheat sheet down here, and we'll get right to it. First and foremost, we made some changes to our switch templates. And in the switch template view, you'll notice it is kind of shown in a different perspective now. Basically, the way that it's designed and the way that we want the switch templates to be utilized is a concept of having an organizational level template that then is applied to different sites. And then, of course, the switches that are inside of each one of those sites. And the nice thing is that we can build this org template to apply the vast majority of the switch configuration that would be needed for the switches at each individual site to kind of have some commonality across your entire organization. And then underneath of each site, you would then be able to customize the configuration for that specific site if you needed to. And then lastly, if you needed to modify the config for the specific switch, you always have the ability to do that. But the way that we built these templates is pretty straightforward. Essentially, we have this concept called all switch configuration, which would be the settings that would be sent out to all of the switches, regardless of their role or model. And then we have another setting called shared elements. Now, the shared elements are aspects of the configuration that are pulled into the actual rules, like port profiles and networks. So networks, pretty self-explanatory, would be the VLAN configuration. Port profiles allows us to go through and define, is this an actual trunk port? Is it an access port? Are we utilizing voice over IP, which, by the way, is a new feature that we recently released to configure via voice over IP in the Mist dashboard rather than having to utilize supplemental CLI. So that's now here, and some other things as well from a port level config are all available in the port profiles. And a brand new feature that we just released is now dynamic port configuration. So dynamic port configuration allows you to set up a rule that's looking for either a MAC address, a MAC OUI, or LLDP system name information that's sent from the device that's connecting to the switch. So we then could assign a specific port profile depending on the type of device that's connected to the switch. So in this example, I've taken the MAC OUI for the vast majority of Mist APs that were shipped in the early days, and then saying if this MAC OUI is seen when it connected to that switch port, we then would apply the AP port profile when that device connects to the switch. Of course, when that device is removed from the switch goes back to its default settings, whatever that may be, whether that's just an internet-only access or very basic or no access whatsoever to the network, of course, depending on what your config is. So dynamic port configuration, a really good way of having what we refer to as colorless ports. So you can have the switch automatically configure itself depending on the type of device that's connected to the switch. And then finally are the actual rules themselves, where we can go through and add in specific rules depending on what type of switch you're configuring. So I'm just going to set up a basic switch just called EX2300, and then we can say that I want this applied to all of my 2300 series switches when they connect, or maybe just the 24 port variation of the 2300. So this way, all of my 2300 24 port switches, when they connect to the Mist cloud into the specific site, would then receive the port configuration that I'm going to set for it, which we'll just set up a very basic port config just to give you an idea of how this works. We'll just say the first 8 ports that are configured for this switch would be set up as an AP port. And then we could set another port range or a port type. And let's just pick on a specific port type here. We'll just say port number 8 is going to be set up as a default port, but I'm going to enable the dynamic port configuration on that port so that when a device connects to that switchboard, they're automatically going to receive the dynamic port config that we set up previously in the shared elements. And notice that we also have the ability to do CLI config as well. So if you wanted to apply a certain type of supplemental CLI that only applies to the 2300 24 port series switches, you could do that here in this rule. We also can apply the different type of port config depending not only just on the switch model, but we could also apply it to a certain role. So if a switch is a distribution layer switch or an edge level switch or connected in building A or building B or rack A or rack B, or however you want to define these specific roles depending on your organization, we then could get very granular to determine what configuration is applied to which switch, depending on its role, depending on its switch model, or even depending on the switch name. If you name all of your switches with some sort of identifier that identifies it being in a certain location or a certain type of switch role, we could look at that name and then apply the correct switch configuration depending on how the switch has been named. So in this case, we'll just go ahead and leave it as just the 2300 24 port series switches and click the checkbox. And now we have a switch template that is configured, basically saying if I see a 2300 series switch that's 24 ports, I'm going to assign this port configuration, and then all the other remaining switches that are connecting are just simply going to get defined as default switches. So that's kind of how this role, this organization template would work, or config template would work. So once the config template has been assigned, you then go into the switch configuration section, and then you would pick a specific site, and then you could assign that site to a certain type of switch template. And then realize the fact that even though the site has received the organization level config template from the switch settings, all the config changes can be overridden at the site level. So for example, the site had a different NTP server that you wanted to use. Just as a very quick example, you could override whatever configuration was defined by the org level template, and in the site level template, you could define whatever settings you wish. And that applies to everything for shared elements as well, and also for the actual rules. If you wanted to override the template settings, are all possible. So now that that template has been assigned to the site, any switch that's added into that site would then inherit that configuration template. And remember, we always have the ability to go into the individual switch itself and then make individual switch level configuration changes. This is essentially the written configuration that it inherited from the organization template. But notice that we have their CLI commands that are available here, and then we can go through and add an additional switch level CLI commands down there and override any of the settings that are here. Or if you simply just wanted to change a port, just click on the port and then change the port profile for that port and then click save, and that switch config would be updated to the connected switch. So that's a quick review and actually update rather on how we have implemented the switch configuration templates and how that applies from the organization level down to the site and to the individual switch. So another feature that we have recently added is still in beta. You may notice the Gateways tab here on the left-hand side of the screen. That is the now ability for us to actually start collecting telemetry data from the Juniper SRX firewalls. So we can basically adopt those SRX devices into the Mist dashboard, just like we could and can with the EX switches. But this, we're only just looking at telemetry data for now. We can't provide any type of configuration, but just look at all the different types of events that we're actually monitoring from the SRX, everything from simply just connected to unconnected. Also, we're looking at OSPF information, IPsec VPN information, and other things as well to make sure that we're monitoring the healthiness of your experience of the user and the device when it's connected to the cloud. Also, if you have the application visibility subscription or license activated on your SRX, we are able to look at that information as well and display that here in the Mist dashboard. Notice there's a bunch of applications that are being shown here. And we then will also eventually be able to start utilizing that information that we're capturing from the SRX and then be able to paint a really nice 360-degree view on what a user's experience looks like from connected to a Mist AP wirelessly. Obviously, all the settings and information we're getting from a wireless perspective, how healthy that client is. And then we would also be able to show from the AP to the switch, from the switch to the router to the WAN, and then be able to show you that whole picture of what that end user experience looks like. And if there's any potential issues, where those issues may lie, whether they're at the AP level, switch level, router level, or WAN level. So that's kind of the goal of being able to gather some of this telemetry information from those devices at the edge and then putting them into the Mist cloud. So much more to come there. These are still the very early stages of getting some of that telemetry information from the SRX. If you do have an SRX that's in your lab or an environment that you're okay testing with, let us know. We can enable that feature in your Mist dashboard. You can start gathering some telemetry data from those devices. Another new feature that I like to talk about is something called site variables. So site variables are actually something that we have had in the product now for quite a while, but they've only been accessible via API. So the idea is that if you had multiple sites and using one configuration template, let's say that you're using different VLANs for your users at each one of your sites. Traditionally, you would think that you'd have to create a different config template or site level specific config for each one of those sites when they have those different VLANs. Not true. We can utilize site level variables to define those VLANs at a site level. So you can have the single config template that's actually referencing that variable in its configuration. And then you tell the system, if you see this variable for this site, then assign a different VLAN attribute for that specific AP at that site. So it's a really easy configuration. Like I said, this has actually been done via API for quite a while within the Mist dashboard or within the Mist solution, but we've now included it in the dashboard so you can use it through the UI. So it's pretty simple. You would simply just come into the SSID, and instead of typing in a static VLAN like 22, you actually just type in a variable. So that variable would be included within curly braces. So VLAN variable, just as an example. So you don't have to use that specific verbiage that I have. You just have to make sure that whatever word you use is inside of 2 curly braces. And that's what you're going to be tracking for the variable. So I'm just going to save that config. And then what we do is inside the site configuration, we go into the specific site that we want to configure. And then in that setting at the very bottom of the screen, or depending on how your resolution is on your monitor, maybe over there to the right, but there is a section here called site variables. So you add in a variable and you type in that same variable that we used previously. So VLAN variable followed by the curly brace, and then you put in a value, say 22. So now what we're telling the system is that if you see that variable in the configuration, use this VLAN ID for all of the APs connected to this site. And you can rinse and repeat this for multiple different sites across your organization. You could deploy this or issue this out through API, so you don't have to do this one by one for every single site. But this is kind of the idea of being able to assign those unique variables for each site without having to create a new configuration template for every single use case that may have different VLANs. Now, the other cool thing is that any time that you issue a credential, or not a credential, but if you issue a variable or setting within the Mist dashboard, like radius server IP address as an example, or VLAN, you could actually reference that using a site variable. So say that every site also had a different VLAN, a different radius server. You could just type in, radius, just as an example. Again, what's inside of the curly braces is irrelevant. You could type anything in there you want. I just put in radius, and we could say 192.168.20.20, just as an example. And then now what we're telling the system is that if you see that variable referenced in the config, then use that IP address for the value. And again, you could do this for shared secrets too. If a shared secret was different for every site, you could use those variables. So this makes it a really cool way of using a single configuration template for your entire deployment, even if you have site level specific settings like VLANs or radius servers or other things, which you would traditionally have to create a separate SSID structure for. A really cool feature here. So the last thing that I want to show today in the demo is actually a new Marvis feature. So every update video, I try to show you some new things that are happening in Marvis. And this one won't disappoint. This is a new feature that we have to show roaming history of a client as they have gone about their daily business, essentially. And then that way you can actually see the roam occur. And if there's any potential issues with the roam. So all of this information is obtainable through our client level insights, but it's just not as graphically oriented, it's more raw data oriented. So Marvis really allows you to see that whole picture graphically. So all you need to do is type in roam of the specific MAC address or host name of that client, and then you'll get a visual representation of what that roaming history looks like. Now this has been for today for me. So I'm going to change this for the last 24 hours just to get a better picture of my roaming history. So for the last 24 hours, you have an idea. Now this is my home office for my personal cell phone. And as I have basically was in the living room yesterday evening through most of the day downstairs. And then, you can see that my signal got pretty bad there last night. And the reason is because when I go to bed, I don't have the best Wi-Fi coverage in my bedroom. So you can clearly see that I actually roamed to my bedroom, at this time, about 11:19 p.m. last night. I made a roam from the living room to the office AP, and it was in my bedroom all evening until this morning when I left and then started doing work actually in the bedroom. But then we can zoom in a little bit. You can see how I have gone from upstairs to downstairs a couple times as I was eating breakfast and taking some phone calls this morning, and then pretty much stayed in my office, for the rest of the day. So each one of these events, roaming events, if you hover over these checkboxes, will show you whether or not it was a good roam or a bad roam. What your signal was previously, what it was when you roamed, AP, channel, all of that fun stuff. Of course, most importantly, the time that the roam occurred, so you can correlate that with any other type of events. So yeah, this is a great new feature that we just released for Marvis. Really cool option to be able to visualize the roam of a client, especially when you're trying to troubleshoot or see the overall healthiness of that user experience throughout their day-to-day environment. So the other thing I want to try to do with every video is to try to give you a quick tip, something you may not be aware of or a cool feature within the product that many people may not know about. This one is going to be a quick one, but I think a really relevant one that not a lot of people are aware of, and that's the ability to actually look for a specific client based on their MAC address within the solution, but not necessarily having to use the correct delineation as far as either whether it's a dash, a space, or a colon between the correct octets within a MAC address. So in this case, this is our live demo environment, and let's just look at one of the client's MAC addresses. So here we have a client MAC address of 5032. It's one of the MAC addresses. So say you wanted to find information out about that client, and someone asked you, or you looked at the logs of your radius server, or your switch, or your firewall, or something. And you wanted to be able to grab the specific information on that client, you would simply just come into monitor page and then insights, and then you select client, and then you can type in the host name or the MAC address. In this case, we know what the actual host name of the client was, Everest. But let's just say that, and you notice how quickly that came up, by the way. I just type in EV and it found all of the different clients that have that name and have EV in the name. We can get that information very quickly. But again, let's just pretend that we have the MAC address. So I can just type in 5032, and then we have devices that match that MAC address that came up pretty quickly. But again, we're focused on Everest. So why don't we just change that to 727E? So we'll go to 72:7E, and then now we have just that device, that client that has been found using the last four. But let's pretend that the log that we're looking at had dashes instead. So we can just type in 72-7E. That still searches the same way. So it's cool that we can find that MAC address or find that device using whatever format you'd like for MAC addresses. So you can just copy and paste. There's no need to have to go through and change it, whether it's a colon, a dash, or even if it's just lumped together. We can do the same thing, 727E. We can find that device very quickly, get into the client insights, so you can get into that data very rapidly, irregardless of how the MAC address is displayed or typed into the system. So great little tip there, pretty quick, pretty easy one, but something I think that goes overlooked a lot, and maybe something you weren't even aware of. But I think it's a great feature of how we can search and look for clients within the product. So with that, everybody, again, thanks for spending the time to pay attention to the update here this last month or so. Again, my apologies for being late. And also, by the way, apologies for not using the same camera I usually do. There's something wrong with it. I couldn't get it to work, so I had to fall back to my just webcam on my computer. So apologize for the quality of the video. Hopefully get that fixed next time. We'll see. But again, I'll try to follow up with another video sometime right before Thanksgiving, and then we'll follow up again right before the end of the year with the latest updates. Lots going on here at Juniper Mist, so hopefully we'll have some cool stuff to talk about next time. But as always, everyone, again, if you have any questions, let me know. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll be sure to see you soon. Thanks again.